Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about the Nets' decision to move on from Jacques Vaughn for the second half of their year. Now we're going to be doing a little more opinionated stuff down the stretch of the show here, where there's not too much live sports action going on other than some college basketball right now, which did get a top 10 matchup last night that was pretty entertaining, but that is not really the focus of this show exactly just yet. Right now we're going to be doing an exercise called Stock Up / Down for recent NBA lottery picks. I have a list of a bunch of guys here, not every single lottery pick from the past few years, but I'm specifically going to be looking at the 2020, 2021, and 2022 drafts. And I just feel like it's a little bit too early to judge some of these rookies in terms of the stock. Like this exercise that I'm going to run here, we are going to be touching on the rookies in the next segment by themselves. But as a note, I don't have any of the number one picks necessarily in these categories just now. I think that if you're thinking stocks wise, they were already very high coming into the league. And I think that they've all been great between all three of them. I don't think that they've necessarily risen all too much like we've seen sort of the reputations of some of these other guys where there was more of an unknown. But I consider Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham, and Paolo Banchero all to be on the higher side in terms of what their future projects to be, how I feel about them going forward, all of that. So on that note, getting into the biggest risers here, I have Tyrese Halliburton, Jonathan Kuminga, Jalen Duren, Jalen Williams, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Denny Avdia, and Devin Vassell. Not going to be touching on every single one of these guys, but definitely giving my thoughts on a handful of them. Tyrese Halliburton, this is sort of the obvious one here. I'm not going to spend all too much time on it because at this point, everybody knows how good he is. He was the 12th overall pick in 2020, and it's very interesting to me because he's somebody that came in with a very unconventional jump shot, still has an unconventional jump shot, but I really do feel like that turned a lot of people away at the time of his draft, and he's come out and he's been an absolute star, especially since getting traded from the Kings, being able to fully show off the playmaking and scoring ability that he has. I know that he was struggling a little bit headed into that span in between the in-season tournament where he was really putting people on notice and the All-Star break. His numbers dipped a little bit, but I still think he's incredible. I think that he is headed for his first All-NBA selection this year. I think that he's sort of that similar jump to what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did as of last season, but Tyrese is doing it a little bit earlier in his career as well. Kuminga, we've talked about him a ton. He has been incredible for the Warriors, especially as of the last month, somebody that came in as much more of a raw prospect and is finally being able to put himself and these skills together. The Warriors are accepting that this maybe isn't quite their championship contending year, but that they really do have something in a couple of these young draft guys, and Jonathan Kuminga is one of them. It's been awesome to see him flourish. Jalen Duren is somebody that I love watching. Honestly, I do love watching the Pistons. I think that when you get them on a good night, they do compete hard. They lose a lot. They're sort of like the Grizzlies team that I've talked about in the past as well, as far as there are people that they feel like they still have to prove themselves, and so they compete. They're maybe not, top-end talent good enough just yet, but Duren I have seen tons of improvement with. I think that when he was coming in the 2022 draft class, I was sort of at a point where he was with a lot of big-name guys at Memphis. Imani Bates was one of them, and it was under this new Penny Hardaway team, and I was really disappointed to see the way that that team sort of fell short and they weren't good. And I was confused why Jalen Duren at first was quite as highly touted as he was. And then it was really during the course of that draft season that I understood, oh, it's because this guy projects to be so much more. He's with an inexperienced team. He is in a situation where there's not a ton of spacing for him. But what this guy can be is a really good two-way player for them, a rim roller. And what I've been impressed with, because the defense and the rebounding, that was already there, but I've seen him really start to be more aggressive with the ball in his hands. He has been a lot more improved of an individual player, but still plays into the team setting as well. So I've had a ton of fun watching Jalen Duren this year. Another guy that I want to point out in this group as well is Denny Avdia. He was the 9th pick in 2020, sorry. There's always been, this reputation of being a talented wing defender, but this season we've seen the offense take a significant jump, and it's not like the numbers are otherworldly necessarily, but we've seen the team trust him to do more with the ball. He's having a career high in usage percentage, career highs in points and assists, and the shooting splits have been very much improved. Jumped from 44 and sub 30 last year to 52 and 40 this year. And this is a result of him shooting a career high 71% at the rim and hitting 50% of threes from the corner. Not shooting specifically the threes at necessarily an incredible volume, but still 36% on non-corner threes. And you know what? He's been effective in sort of the limited looks that he's been doing. He understands his own game. This is a work in progress for him. And as a result, we saw him smash his career high last week versus the Pelicans. It was 25, and then he dropped to 43 against the Pelicans while still playing good defense on the other end. Didn't see him abandon that true identity that he has, and he has been, they end up losing that game, but they were down 20. He sort of claws them back into it, and we're talking about the Wizards here, who going into the year, I thought that they had the most grim situation across the league. They didn't really have any, cornerstone guys for them. We'll talk about one of their other draft picks within the past few years, but Avdia has really seemed to be a guy that, could have a very bright future. He's still just 23 years old. He just turned 23 within the past month or so. So he's got a very bright future in my perspective, and I think that he's somebody they can absolutely build around. They have, again, not really talking about this year's rookie class, but they added Bilal Coulibaly as well. Another international guy, another guy that has a lot of raw talent, is very young, was one of the youngest in his class. So we can see them sort of build these two together and sort of evaluate from there. Biggest fallers I have from these past few draft classes, I just sort of alluded to it. Johnny Davis, who was the 10th overall pick for the Wizards in 2022. He has been he wasn't even the youngest coming in his class as well. He had a couple years behind him, but he has been a major disappointment for them. James Wiseman, James Bouknight, Joshua Primo, Patrick Williams, Killian Hayes, and Kyra Lewis. So don't want to get on Johnny Davis too much because at this point, sort of what's the point? But James Wiseman has been one that has hurt me personally the most for myself, because I loved the idea of him as a prospect coming out of high school and then briefly college. And I'm sure Warriors fans can feel the pain more so even than I can. It's interesting to look back because the position that the Warriors were in at that point in 2020, where they were just a couple years removed, that is, from being a championship winner. They were able to have this second overall pick in 2020, and they end up coming away with just about nothing. if you look at this draft class, I mean, can you imagine Tyrese Halliburton in this system that the Warriors run? Like, it would have been so incredible to watch. That being said, Halliburton was never going to go number 2 in the draft. It's just not what he was necessarily looked at the time. LaMelo Ball was sort of the name that would have been more so reasonable to expect the Warriors to take at this slot. Which still also would have been very entertaining to watch. I mean, Wiseman just never really had it. There is a big thing with him when it comes to sort of the defensive IQ and the awareness. The fit was just never really there. I saw a very interesting clip the other day of Draymond talking to Wiseman on the court. Wiseman said something along the lines of, "Oh, I didn't see it." And Draymond's like, "Yeah, I know you didn't see it. That's why I'm talking to you." And it just never worked out there. He ends up just getting them a handful of second round picks. So definitely disappointing there. Killian Hayes is the other name I want to briefly touch on here. 7th overall pick in that same 2020 class. A lot of people loved him coming into the draft. He had a lot of love coming from overseas. He's a strong defender. He's a good playmaker. The question was always, can that offense develop? And the answer was no. He never really got to be efficient of any sorts from the field. The Pistons ended up waiving him at the trade deadline this year after being unable to find a trade partner. I think that, the ceiling is definitely not as high as it was looked at to be before, but I am curious if you are a team like the San Antonio Spurs, you are not looking to compete this year, and you are looking for a point guard to run more of an actual system around. I don't know why they wouldn't take a flyer on him, but I mean, at this point, it seems like it could be a little bit of a lost cause. It's been a couple weeks. He still has not found a home yet. I'm sure that's going to change at some point. I'm sure somebody else is going to give him a shot, but it doesn't look great as of now. Kyra Lewis, I also had in that tier if I did not mention him there. Some slight stock up for a handful of people. I have Keegan Murray, Jabari Smith Jr., Jaden Ivey, Benedict Mathurin, Aaron Nesmith, and Jalen Smith. We have a lot of guys from the 2022 draft class. Keegan Murray is one that I think has really, soared the most in terms of that list of guys. It wasn't a very popular pick at the time. I myself thought that they were sort of reaching and trying to draft more so for draft fit as opposed to need. I thought that Jaden Ivey was the better player than Murray headed into this draft, but I thought that they were trying to avoid stocking up too much on guards. And I mean, Murray has been a great fit and a great player for the Kings through his first 1.5 seasons. What is interesting to me is how underrated his defense has been. He has faced the 10th most isolation possessions per game on the defensive end of the floor. He's holding opponents to just 20% shooting. He's second in the league in points per possession in those isolation situations, only behind Evan Mobley. So the question around him is, what is that ceiling? He clearly has more on the defensive end than he was necessarily thought to coming into the league. I think he's an incredibly smart player. He doesn't turn the ball over. The thing is, the shot making hasn't been quite as good this season as we saw in his rookie year. We've seen a pretty significant downtick from last year, which is the only thing that really held me back from putting him in the highest of risers category. He shot 44% from 3 last season. It is down to 28% this year. And, he has improved percentages at the rim and in the mid-range, but just not knocking down shots the way that we thought we would have, that he was based off of how he played last season. And we've seen head coach Mike Brown sort of push him to be more of a creator for himself as well. I think that this is happening marginally over time, and I do think that downtick in shooting is just sort of temporary. He was a very good shooter in college as well, so I think it'll come back around. But that's my thoughts on Keegan Murray. quickly to rattle off some of these other 2022 guys, Jabari Smith Jr., I think, is another one who has been a very solid defender, better than we were expecting after last season. A lot of people were questioning his offensive abilities and his athleticism. We still haven't seen this alpha scorer from him that, if you remember, going into last year, a lot of people were buzzing about him potentially being the number one pick over Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren. He ends up falling to 3, and he hasn't been necessarily the alpha guy. That's not what he was in college either. He only shot, I think it was like 10 to 11 shots per game, which I remember doing the draft research at the time. That would have been the lowest for a number one pick since Ben Simmons was drafted all those years ago in 2016, I believe it was. A lot of people thought that this was possibly a result of Bruce Pearl's team offense at Auburn. I think that that's definitely part of it. I think that he also just doesn't really have the comfortability. If you remember, like, he's a big guy. He stands at 6'10", even longer wingspan. I don't think that he has incredible shot creation ability, not the strongest handle necessarily. Definitely struggles with going to his left. And I think he's a very solid player, very capable starter on both ends of the court. The question is he ever going to be able to reach the ceiling that a lot of people thought that he might headed into that draft? Jaden Ivey had a very weird start to the season under Monty Williams. He was penalized for not being good enough on the defensive end. He wasn't a very good shooter coming into this season, but ever since becoming the regular starter for them, he's been having a very nice turnaround to what was a slow start to the year. He started every game for them since December 18th. At his 28 games, he's averaging 18, 4, and 4 on 46 and 40 shooting splits. He can be a little erratic still in some of the decision making. I love watching Jaden Ivey. Again, I actually do enjoy watching the Pistons. I think they have the cornerstones at guard, forward, and center between him, Cade Cunningham, and Jalen Duren. But turnovers, especially late in the game, have been a real thing with the Pistons this year. And Jaden Ivey is definitely somewhat guilty of that, averaging 2.9 turnovers per game since being a starter. Again, some of these late game decisions can just be a little harmful for the Pistons when they're trying to be in these big moments, but I like a lot of what we've seen from Ivy, especially the improved shooting. He shot just 26% from 3 in his freshman year of college, and we've seen gradual improvement from him year after year, his sophomore year in college, and now his first 2 seasons in the NBA. So I am definitely a fan of Jaden Ivey. My slightly downtrending players, I have Ochai Agbaji, Ousmane Dieng, Jeremy Sohan, Davion Mitchell, Moses Moody, Josh Giddey, and Evan Mobley. As far as this group here, I still have a little bit of stock, I think, in Moses Moody. I've been a big fan of him since he played in college. I think that he came into the year and he looked to be more confident. He was put in situations with the Warriors where, especially in the playoffs last year, he didn't look very certain about where he should be, what he should be doing. I thought that he came in this year seeming to be sort of a higher intelligence player, but we've seen the efficiency drop and we've seen him sort of fall out of the rotation for the Warriors. So somebody that definitely stock is down right now, but I still do have faith in him. And then the last 2 names on this list are a little bit interesting, Josh Giddey and Evan Mobley, because they're both starters on some of the up-and-coming teams in the NBA. And it might be a little strange to have them on this list. Now, with Giddey, we're going to talk just basketball here with him. I think that the shooting has been a real issue. He's not afraid to take some of these shots, specifically the corner threes when he's left wide open, which I think that he should continue to shoot, because at some point you have to be able to keep the defense honest. When you look at the game they played against the Celtics earlier this year, that was a very large factor for why the Thunder were able to pull that game out. He ends up having a hot shooting night, but the offensive limitations in terms of shooting, scoring, is definitely hurting him for somebody that I think that a lot of players, a lot of people were really high on him after his first couple seasons. Evan Mobley, I feel a little bit guilty almost having him on this stock down list because I have been a big fan of Mobley as well, going back to USC. The defense is potentially generational with him. I just think that it's really tough. I mean, the position that he's in, I think that the Cavs, for as great of a team they are, I think that they're a little bit redundant at their best positions. I think that Garland and Mitchell do a lot of the same things, and I think that Mobley and Allen do a lot of the same things. And I just don't think that there is necessarily a level as far as, the way that people were talking about him early in his career, the lack of creation that he can make happen on offense sort of hurts him, I think. He does a lot of what Jarrett Allen does, but Jarrett Allen is just a more efficient player at those things. You'd like to see him develop maybe a little bit of an outside shot, one of the two of them. Jarrett Allen doesn't really seem like he's ever going to have that in his game. Evan Mobley was getting Kevin Garnett comparisons over the course of his first couple seasons, so that's almost why I think the expectations were just really high for him, and as a result, I've had a little bit of a downtick with him, but I'm definitely not out on him as a player as a whole. I also have questions whether or not Cleveland is the best fit for him long term. And then the last few names here that I have neutral, I'm thinking about it. I didn't have Scotty Barnes on this list. I didn't really know where to put him. He's somebody that he won Rookie of the Year. He had a lackluster second season, but he's back to an all-star this year. So I would say, you have to go with, especially if you're looking at where their stock was coming into this season, you have to say he's up. I guess I'd put it slight up, probably could be significantly up. But last few guys here that I have as far as neutral, Jalen Green, Onyeka Okongwu, LaMelo Ball, I think that they all sort of have their things. I like all of these players, but we just see different moments. We see good moments, we see bad moments. LaMelo Ball, the biggest thing with him is staying healthy. The on-court talent is clearly there. He was an all-star in his second season, but health has been a major concern for him over the past couple seasons, and as a result, I didn't really know where to put him. If anything, I was honestly leading on the stock down because I do think that that injury concern is real. So on that note, we are going to be taking our next break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to be talking about this past season, the 2023 rookie class, and how they're doing at the midway point. So stick with us.